Welcome to Syntax. Today we've got an episode for you on hosting meetups. It's good to see meetups are finally back. I guess they've been back for maybe a year or two, but I feel like the comeback of meetups after COVID was very slow. And I personally got my start in speaking at meetups. I met tons of really cool people at meetups. I can't say enough good things about going to meetups and conferences and actually talking tech with people IRL. So we've got CJ on today. CJ is part of the Syntax team. What does CJ stand for? Do we know that? Christopher James?
Sure. Yeah, it's whatever you want. I don't tell people what it stands for.
No? All right.
Cassette junkie. He loves cassette.
Every single time we have CJ on his byline, we'll do a new new thing that CJ means.
I love that.
Definitely.
So CJ runs the DenverScript meetup, and he's here to talk to us all about that. And also, I've run a couple meetups in my day in the past. We just ran, or Ben just ran one last week. Sentry sponsored it as a Toronto DevTools meetup, which was really cool. We had a great time chatting with everybody there. And every time I go away from a meetup, I'm like, that was fun. That was really good chit chatting. So welcome, CJ. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this stuff. Definitely passionate about it. And I think, I guess I'll talk about it, but that's kind of what it takes to run a meetup is you just got to want to. Because anybody can do it.
And you know what it takes to solve bugs is Sentry. So you want to head over to sentry.io/syntax, sign up and get 2 months for free. If you have bugs in your app, and let's face it, we all know you do, you're going to need Sentry on your side. So check it out. All right, let's get into it. First and foremost, CJ, you've been hosting the DenverScript meetup for how long now?
I think a little over a year at this point.
Cool. And so that was hosted by somebody else before, or you took it over?
It was, yeah. So the team was led by Matt Webb, and there were a few others. But essentially during COVID, they went fully remote. The numbers started to dwindle, less people started showing up. And then the organizing team kind of ran out of steam and decided they weren't going to do it anymore. So it sat dormant for about a year. And initially they put out a message was like, does anybody want to take this over? And no one really stepped up. And then a little over a year ago, I was actually running the Vue.js meetup. And I thought, and all that was also very small. So I thought, why not use my energy to organize a bigger meetup? And then asked if I could take that one over. And then started running the DenverScript one instead of the Vue meetup.
That's awesome. And DenverScript is great because it has good vibes. One of the things I noticed about it really quickly is that it has a good location. Did you establish the location for that, or was that already established? And how did you go about finding a place to even host this meetup?
Here in Denver, there's a place called Code Talent. They're like a technical recruiting agency, but they have a space. It's kind of amazing because they pretty much offer it up to any meetup that wants to host. And so I had been hosting the Vue.js meetup there. The Node.js meetup, which isn't around anymore, it was always hosted there. DenverScript was always hosted there. It's really lucky that a place like that exists where essentially they have tons of space. They always provide free beer and drinks. And so, Code Talent has been the main thing where we've hosted. In the past, like when I was running Vue, sometimes I would just search around town to see if there were like event spaces. And a lot of times event spaces are developer friendly and might actually let you host for free. Depending on the size of the meetup, you also could just like meet up at a brewery or something like that. If you have an employer that has like a larger space, you could host there too. So back when I worked at 303 Software, there were a couple of times where Code Talent wasn't available for some reason. And we ended up just letting people into the office and sat around a big conference room table and just had a meetup in there.
Yeah,
that's cool.
It feels like that's like a somewhat common to be able to potentially ask your employer, hey, can we host this here or there? I think it's probably a little bit easier if you have a direct line to the people who are in charge. Like I could never have done that when I worked at Ford, obviously. They would have said, hell no to that. But, you know, when I worked at small agencies, I could imagine approaching anybody saying, hey, can we host people here and have that work? So I think if you're out there and you're wondering, like, where can I host something? Maybe even if you have a decent space, even like a small room or whatever, and you could ask them. I think to your point about like hosting at a brewery, I think that works better for like meetups that are more social, right? Didn't you just go to something like that, Wes? Was that at a brewery?
Yeah. It was at Mascot Brewing in Toronto, and they gave us like we did it with the Syntax meetup as well. Often pubs and bars will have like a spot or a back room or like a top floor, or in our case, it was a top patio where you can rent it out and you say, hey, if I bring 40, 50 people here, and either, hey, we promise we're going to hit $2,000 in drinks, or can we just bring a bunch of people? They'll often just like mark it off for you. Even here in Hamilton, there was one for quite a while before it got knocked down for condos where they would just do the top floor and they had like a microphone and like a PA, which is really nice as well if you're doing some talks as well. I like the ones that are at pubs as long as there's like not too much music like bumping, you know, because like the thing that drives me nuts about conferences, parties, and meetups is you go somewhere and they're blasting music, and like I just want to talk about like Node.js module resolution patterns, and I don't want like T-Pain in the background where I'm trying to compete with it.
Wes is the type of guy to go to a pub and want to talk about node module resolution.
Yeah, well, it's literally what we did for like half an hour.
I love it.
It was hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And it depends on like what the outcome is, right? Like, is it like a mini conference talk type of deal, or is it just like a hangout? Because the Syntax one that we did, it was more of like a let's get together and just meet people and chat and talk tech, but even just talk anything. But things like DenverScript are a little bit more focused. CJ, do you want to like give like an outline of like what goes on at a meetup like DenverScript and maybe the structure of it?
Sure. So I like to have things just like very talk focused. So every meetup, we always try to have a short talk, which is anywhere from 8 minutes to 15 minutes. And then we have a longer talk, which is anywhere from like 30 minutes to an hour. So every meetup, we have the short and long talk, but we also like to start with JavaScript news. So we have an organizer team of about 4 people. So I have myself, we have Cass, Chad, and Marlena, and we all share responsibilities in terms of putting chairs out when the meetup starts or being there first to unlock the door. And then one of us will always pick news that's happened over the past month. So we kick the meetup off with going over the news, and then we go into the talks. I'll say another thing, we might talk about this later, but one of the things I always like to do is start the meetup off mentioning that we have a code of conduct, because anyone is welcome to attend these meetups. And I always like to set the ground rules. Like I say, this is the code of conduct we have. These are the main things. And then I make sure that everyone knows who the organizers are. They all raise their hands because, I mean, usually everyone's nice and well-behaved, but because anyone can attend, sometimes you might get a weirdo in there. I like to make sure that people understand that we have some rules and we want to stick to those rules.
Have you ever
been at it?
Throw somebody out?
Yeah.
Grab by the scruff of the neck?
Not recently, no.
Not recently.
Okay, well, what's the story here?
Is there? I'm trying to think. There's. I guess there have just been people that like maybe talk more than people would like, or like try to hold people's ear, or I don't have any specific stories.
Yeah, you do get that with meetups. Is you get all kinds of people, and sometimes you get people who will dominate your time. And that's one tip we've had in the past is just like learn to exit a conversation being like, it was great to meet you. I remember Jerry Seinfeld said this once because he gets people come up to them and they're a little bit nervous or whatever. And sometimes conversation is great. Sometimes I want to talk to somebody for an hour. And sometimes it's just like, all right, I need to like, I want to like do the room. I want to meet like a whole bunch of other people. So like learning how to like break away from those types of conversations, especially if it's like uncomfortable with the type of person is a skill in itself.
Yeah, even if it's not uncomfortable, I've learned that a lot from you, Wes. And even I use this all the time in social situations. We were just at it was like a kindergarten first day kind of like ice cream party. And I wanted to meet a lot of the parents. There's a lot of people there. And I was talking to a guy for a long time and I had a great conversation. So it's not like it was an awkward conversation, but I just wanted to go meet other people around. And I used these West Boss techniques. Hey, really great to meet you. It's like, it really works in any situation. So I feel like that can help outside of things. I do think the code of conduct thing is great. I cannot imagine being in a situation where I'm a guest at something like that and would want to disrupt in any sort of way. Yeah. But some people, I guess, just don't have that kind of awareness. So you're hosting a meetup. you want to start either hosting a brand new one or you're taking over someplace. How do you get people to show up, one, and two, how do you let them know it's happening? How do you get RSVPs, those types of things? Like, what has worked for you?
Yeah, so we do have a Twitter account. It doesn't have too many followers, but I think anyone that wants to stay up to date at least is following our account. And anytime we publish the latest event, we put a link there. So that helps. And then we also have some Discords and Slacks that are a part of the Denver area. There's like the Colorado Tech community and one other one that has a few thousand devs on it. So I'm always sure to post the link in there like a month before to get people to show up as well. And then it's sad to say, but it's still the case that meetup.com is kind of the biggest one and the place that most people go to when they're looking for a meetup. Mm-hmm. So that's where we have all of our event details. And meetup.com itself just being a discovery platform, like people will find it there just because our meetup is posted on there. I say sad to say because it's super expensive. They have a monopoly, so like their site is jank sometimes, but they do nothing about it because they're like the only one that like you have to use. But yeah, so we use meetup.com and I think let me just pull it up really quick because the meetup itself, like because I took it over from a previous group, yeah, it has over 3,000 members on it for the DenverScript meetup. And when some people come across that, it's like almost like an automatic legitimizer. They're like, oh, you have a meetup with 3,000 people? Yeah. We usually have like attendance of like 40, 50 people. But yeah, just being on meetup.com is one thing. I will say that Guild is a newer one that's coming around and it feels like it's picking up steam and more people are using it. But I think that's one of the issues with meetup platforms. It's like critical mass because like meetup already has so many people on it that it's a lot easier for people to find you. And so if you use these alternative platforms, you kind of have to do the work to actually get the word out for it. Yeah.
Guild put together by a friend of the show, Taz. Yeah, Wes has known Taz for a very long time, right?
Yeah, it's funny. Taz was huge in the Toronto meetup scene, and now he's literally at every conference now. I think he lives in London, but he goes to every single conference and is always talking. Like he loves in-person events. Yeah, Guild is working on some pretty cool stuff around that.
Yeah, he's the man. Cool. So Meetup, or you can check out Guild or anything like that.
Yeah, we should say the Meetup one is actually kind of funny because the discovery platform is great, but also you get a lot of people who are just there for the pizza and beer, yes. Which is kind of funny. We said on the last one, which is at the Syntax meetup, I think we used Meetup, and we had at least 3 people who had no clue what Syntax was, and they were just showing up, and several of them were not even like developers. They were simply just there. They're nice people, but it's kind of hilarious where people drop in, like, grab a couple beers, a couple pieces of pizza, say hello, and then go on their way. So if you're looking for a free dinner, it's probably a good place to go. I don't know if I could ever do that though. I'd be so anxious, and I'm not even an anxious guy.
Yeah, I couldn't do that for something I don't know anything about. But I would be lying if I were to say that I haven't shown up to DenverScript at least once for a free dinner, even though I did want to see the Tech Talks and be a part of the community. But, I do love showing up and just chit-chatting and grabbing a free slice of pizzas and bed about it as well.
Can we talk about that? Is like, who's paying for all this beer and pizza? Like, how do you get people to pay for that?
So you try to find sponsors, but like I said, co-talent is essentially, because even having an event space is a sponsorship. So we appreciate that. And then the fact that they provide the beer as well, they're basically sponsoring that. But if you can't, then you find some company and you let them know that, hey, we'll advertise. We'll put your logo on the intro slides. We'll let people know who you are and that you're sponsoring us. You can sometimes, like, some companies will set up like $200 a month or something like that, or they might set a limit of sorts, but then you can use that money for getting drinks, getting food, or maybe even reserving an event space if you haven't found one like that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the main thing is finding some company that will pay for the stuff. I will say, like, for most of the time when I was running the Vue.js meetup, we didn't actually have any corporate sponsors. I was the sponsor. Like, I would actually put my Venmo QR code up at the beginning and be like, hey, I bought the pizza. If you want to help out, throw me a couple dollars. But ultimately, I didn't expect to get any of the money back. I was kind of just like, I wanted to have the meetup. I wanted to get it going. And that's kind of what it took because I couldn't find any sponsors for it.
What about getting people to speak? I know, Wes, you said you got a lot of experience talking at meetups. My very first conference talk ever, and it's not really a conference talk, was at ReactScript in Denver. Was it ReactScript or Denver React? That's what it was. And I did that because I had gotten a talk at Zeit Day, which is now Vercel, and I saw the venue and I was like, I'm not prepared to speak at this venue. So I messaged the folks at Denver React and was like, can I please speak? And they let me on for, a 20-minute spot. But besides people approaching the DenverScript, themselves, how do you get people to actually speak and fill that space? Because that feels like that would be stressful.
It's one of the hardest parts. And honestly, I think one of the reasons why I do like running meetups is because I like giving talks too. So when I ran the Vue meetup, if I couldn't find a speaker, I would just give a talk. I would pick something about Vue that I like, and it'd basically just be the CJ show. But for DenverScript, we do have quite a few people that have submitted talks, and then more and more people are interested. But on our site, we have a talk submission form. So we always let people know, at the start of the meetup, at the end of the meetup, in the middle of the meetup, we always say, we're looking for speakers. Please, please, please submit your talks. And so we have a form where people can submit. And the form itself has different types of talks, right? If you want to give a lightning talk or a long talk or a short talk. And we even say for some people, if you just have an idea for a talk, or you want to give a talk, but you have no idea where to start, just submit something, and then the organizers will work with you. Because all the organizers of our meetup have speaking experience. So we're really trying to kind of foster that community of people practicing. And that's one of the reasons I like hosting the meetup, is it being a practice avenue. Just like you said, for if you want to give a talk at a conference, you kind of have to start somewhere. It's pretty hard to just start speaking at conferences. And so one of the things I do at my meetup is I make sure that it's live streamed or at least recorded. So that way, anybody that does give a talk at least has some evidence that they can share when they're submitting conference talks and stuff like that.
How long are these talks usually?
It varies. So a lightning talk, we say, is 8 minutes with 2 minutes for questions. Okay. And then short talk up to 20 minutes, and then a long talk anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour.
Yeah. And do you feel like live streaming hurts attendance? I know that's even with online conferences now, or conferences, they'll stream the things. I always wonder about that. It even goes back to sports, where they would black out a sports game just so that you had to buy tickets to go to it. I mean, it gets that. So do you feel like that live streaming hurts or helps the DenverScript meetup?
I haven't found that it hurts. If anything, I only just hear praise for thank you so much for streaming. I couldn't make it out of the house today. Or if somebody was a speaker, thanks so much for streaming, because now I have the recording of the talk. Right now, our YouTube channel and live stream isn't very big. We at most have maybe 5 or 6 people tuning in. But like I said, the main reason I do it is just to have a record of the talks actually happening. One thing I do want to add about finding speakers is ask people as well. After you've run a meetup a few times and you start getting some regulars, and you maybe so we also have a networking 15 to 20 minutes before the event starts, and then also after the event. And during that time, I'm just talking to people, getting to know people. And if I find someone that's a regular, and then I know that, at least they know something, they're technical in some way, they have some technical job, I mentioned is hey, you should give a talk on that. And that's what we also usually like to say is it doesn't matter if you don't have to be an expert to give a talk. You can literally give a talk on, I learned this thing and here's why I like it, or I learned this thing and here's why I don't like it. Or you could give a talk on your experience using a specific library, or you give a talk on a specific code opinion that you have. You can literally talk about anything. And so we try to let people know that it doesn't have to be perfect, and you don't have to be an expert.
I always love meetup talks because they were a little bit more casual,
Raw.
A little bit more interesting in little areas that people have dipped into it. One of my first meetup talks was on webcam access for that type of thing. And that kicked off a whole bunch of conference talks that I did. And we had a guest a couple weeks ago, Alex Rudin, who does the drag and drop, the new drag and drop library. Pragmatic drag and drop. And the way I found out about him was, I don't know, there was some link somewhere on Twitter about a meetup talk on drag and drop, and I watched the whole thing, and I was like, this is fascinating that this guy has gone deep into it. So there's really good stuff in meetup talks that is not necessarily as polished and as big as maybe a full-blown conference talk would be.
Is there any vetting process to make sure that people are going to be able to deliver some kind of value, or maybe even if somebody's new to it, that you'd give them a shorter talk, or is there any process there?
Yeah, so we don't have anything official internally, but we do try to make sure, because we have had sometimes like a talk will end up being like a sales pitch, or maybe
Yeah.
somebody shows up and they're completely unprepared. They don't have any slides and they're just like talking. First of all, you want to get speakers, but then if you do get speakers and they're not that great, you want to try to prevent that. So on our talk submission form, we actually have a checkbox that says, is this a sales pitch or could this be considered a sales pitch? And sometimes we allow that, especially if it's like a sponsor, but we don't want a talk that's just somebody selling something. So there's that. And then if somebody is new, I let them know like there's an open comment box that they can leave on there where they can ask for tips. And then we have a Discord that we invite them to after they've been accepted for a talk. And we let them know, feel free to share your slides, like what concerns do you have, those kinds of things. I've never done any sort of like vetting to see like, I don't do deep research into have they given talks before or how good of a speaker they are. I just want to make sure like they're a real person and they're giving a talk on something that they're interested in.
Yeah, I wonder if like just a page that's like what to expect for your first talk, is enough, because we kind of do that with Syntax, where we let them know, like, this isn't the opportunity to pitch your product. I know exactly how you feel about that, because we get just an endless amount of requests for people to come on the show, and you can tell pretty instantly if they're just trying to sell our audience something, and that's not good for anybody. And I can imagine going to a meetup and spending that time only to get like what are that like when you buy a timeshare. Yeah, it's like a timeshare pitch. Yeah.
Yeah, I would mention, so you mentioned it in talking about also making sure like maybe they do a smaller talk first. In my experience, people kind of self-select to that. Like if they've never given a talk, they're like, there's no way I could talk for 30 minutes. I'm just going to do a lightning talk, test it out, see if I like have the nerves to do it. But I think that's a good strategy as well, as like give them a short slot. And then if they do well, maybe a couple months later, allow them to do like a longer talk that they want to do.
Yeah, and if anyone's listening and thinking, maybe I would like to try do that, because it seems kind of fun to go to conferences and speak at them, but like it's the road to that might not be super clear, but just pick 3 things in CSS that are brand new, or, hey, I built this. This is how I did it. These are the problems that I hit. And just scaffold out like a 10-minute talk and just share what you've done. And I think that those make very interesting content, and you're gonna get past that initial hump of, oh wow, I did my first talk. Like I remember when I was first asked to do my first meetup, I was like, me? No shot, no chance. Like, oh, and I was like, I'm gonna prepare for months for this type of thing, and then like you look back on it, and it was like this was 20 people in a like sitting on Aeron chairs in somebody's office eating pizza. Like probably nobody ever remembers that day in their life at all. But when you're on the other side of it, it feels a little bit scary, and it's a good idea to get into it.
Yeah, and if you're in the audience and you're watching somebody give a talk, and maybe it's their first talk or they're new, I think it's always helpful to express gratitude to the speakers afterwards, even like personally, just to even go up to them and say, hey, great talk. I mean, anything like that can boost somebody's confidence or like get them feeling a little bit better about doing it in the future. We did an episode 19 of Syntax, how to get into speaking at conferences, that has a ton of tips from Wes, who at that time, I think I wasn't doing very many talks at all. I don't know if I had even done one, but you had been doing a whole bunch. And it wasn't until after a little bit of getting into Syntax that I even picked it up myself. So definitely, I think there's a lot of benefits to doing it, whether that is just through personal confidence, but career development or things like that. It can make you research a topic thoroughly enough to understand it, to be able to explain it to somebody else is always great too. And I know it's getting more and more competitive to look for jobs out there. So being on that stage and doing those types of things can be really, really good.
Yeah. I would tie into that though, like technical communication is like a huge skill in being an engineer or anybody that writes software. So like this is another way to practice that. Like if you're trying to sell your team on why you should use X library or why you should implement this pattern, like practicing talking in front of people and like getting your point across, I think is huge and that carries over into like your professional life as well.
Word.
One thing I want to add about like talks is that like your meetup doesn't necessarily have to be talks either. And like sometimes if we can't find a speaker, or maybe like we're just coming back from the Christmas holiday or something like that, and we didn't have anything lined up, we try to do other types of events. So like one time we did just like we had a bunch of technical topics ready to go, and then we told people to group up into groups of no more than 5 or 6. And then the whole night was just spent having conversations about a specific topic. So we mention a topic, people chat about it, and then we move on from there. So that all that required was a facilitator. You didn't have to be an expert or anything. It's just somebody to make sure that you kept time and you had topics ready to go. And another thing I did was I just called it a community night, where honestly, it takes a specific skill set, because I'm pretty good at like coming up with examples on the fly and just like pulling stuff out on the fly. But basically, I just sat up there and I was like, we're going to start with these 3 topics, but wherever it takes us, here we go. And so people, I said, you can ask questions, or if somebody mentions something and you have no idea what it is, I'm going to pull up the docs and I'll explain it. And so that was more of just like it got tons of people in the audience to actually ask questions, or also to give their own experience, right? Because I could be up there talking about, I don't know, Express.js or Next.js or something like that. But if somebody in the audience has experience with it, then I'd leave the floor to them. Like, yeah, tell me about why I'm wrong or whatever else. So yeah, doing any kind of like technical topics or a community night, and then also just like general networking. Like one of the meetups that I attend pretty often here in Denver is the Develop Happy Hour. And that's all about just meeting up at a brewery and drinking and talking to people. So like for that, they don't have to organize speakers. They just need to make sure they have a venue big enough for everyone. And it's still a good time to go and meet people and even talk about tech at that point, but much more casual.
When I taught at the boot camp, every Friday we would do show and tell. And every now and then we didn't have anybody lined up. Usually what we would do is say on like a Monday and be like, hey, you're doing show and tell on Friday. And have something ready to show the class of something that you learned or something. And every now and then it would just be like wide open, like almost like a karaoke. Anyone that can go up. And it was often really interesting to see people, you just plug your laptop in and you just riff on it. And obviously that's probably terrifying for a lot of people. But again, it's a good skill set.
Yeah, it's a good skill set. And if you're wondering like how to get into this, or even like you want to do a meetup light, one of my first agency jobs, we had what were called brown bag lunches, or lunch and learn is something that we would call them, where once a month, one of the engineers would get picked to teach the rest of the team something over lunch. And that is like an internal meetup. And you could start there if your team doesn't have something like this, or you're not used to anything like that. That feels like a meetup light, or a good start to maybe potentially even hosting something, is just by hosting something on work time when everybody's going to be there. You can get practice speaking to people you already know and like. You're not like speaking to a bunch of random people. So I do think that's kind of like a good introduction to this kind of stuff. I'm wondering, CJ, what's the worst part about hosting a meetup?
Probably the Angular devs.
The Angular devs. I mean, so I do want to say, like, if you're doing this on a team, you have to collaborate with people, right? And so I've been lucky enough to find a team of co-organizers that show up, that respond to my Discord messages, that are like basically helping me do the meetup as well. Because in the past, a lot of times, for whatever reason, I kind of had to do everything myself. So like I would make sure the venue's ready to go. I'd make sure the food is ready to go. I'd set up the live stream. I'd be the MC. And if you can share those tasks with a team, that is going to make your life a whole lot easier. So the worst part is the hardest part is finding a good team of reliable organizers that you can work with. Yeah, I guess honestly, like food is always hard too. So I mean, I make it hard though. So whenever I do food at the meetup, I try to make sure that I have everything for all dietary restrictions. So we always have something that's gluten-free, that's dairy-free, and then stuff for everyone else. Not every meetup does this, but part of also making people feel included is having that kind of stuff available for them, which is tricky to do because we actually, like whenever we order pizza, we order from 2 different restaurants because it's cheaper to get Domino's for everyone, but they don't do like gluten-free or dairy-free. And so we get the gluten-free and dairy-free from some other pizza place. But that's just hard because we want to do that. You don't necessarily have to do that.
Yeah, I think that's important though. Like imagine showing up to a meetup and you have like very specific allergies or dietary restrictions, and they have like 8 pizzas and none of them fit your restrictions or allergies or anything. You'd feel pretty unaccepted by this community. So like that feels like something you should probably definitely consider. I want to pose a question to the room here. We've all been to meetups. Wes, CJ, and I'll answer too, is what was the first meetup you ever went to and what was it like?
Yeah, I was trying to think back because I remember the first meetup I went to here in Denver, but then I remembered I went to meetups before when I was living in New Jersey. Like I would commute to New York City. So one of the first meetups, it wasn't a tech meetup, but I went to a Reddit meetup. It was like a Reddit board game meetup. But pretty soon after that, I found the Angular JS meetup, and it actually met at the Google office in New York City. So that was pretty cool to see. And I guess my impressions were like, it was the only tech meetup that I knew of. And it was like very well put together because it was like by Angular and at the Google offices. Later on, when I started going to other meetups, I realized that it takes a good organizing crew and a good, it takes effort to actually put on a good meetup. And that was definitely a good one.
Nice.
My very first meetups was not even coding related. So back when Twitter was first getting off the ground, back when like the iPhone 1 was coming out, Twitter was very like geocentric, meaning that like you would see people that are tweeting near you. And it was really cool because I was very new to tech, but I was going to all of these tweet ups, which was lots of people that were in the like tech scene, you know, and I met so many amazing people from those meetups. Lots of people who were running agencies. I got lots of really good work there. Lots of other developers, lots of people who are in marketing. Like that opened so many doors to being able to work for myself and work with them. And it was amazing. So like, and they would also do this one once a year called like South by Southwest. Everybody used to, that was the one. That was the big conference in Austin. Everybody would go to that, and they would do like a pre-party. I think they called it North by Northwest or something like that. And they did just this huge pre-party where it was just a bunch of people that work in tech that got together. And again, like it was so much fun meeting all of these people. I still have relationships with a lot of these people many, many years later, probably 15 years later. But the first like actual meetup like for tech that I went to was Toronto JS. And I think I even spoke
at the first one that you went to?
Yeah, not the first Toronto JS, but like one of the first meetups I ever went to was somebody asked me to speak at it, which was I think also because I had been doing Ladies Learning Code, which was I was teaching. So people are like, all right, he's a little bit comfortable with that. The timeline's a little fuzzy, but
sure,
those were the early ones. And then I did like a tutorial at one of them, which is another type. Like people brought their laptops and we did like a quick 20-minute coding tutorial as part of the meetup, which was really neat. Like we had starter files and you went home having coded something.
So my first one was a Ann Arbor Drupal meetup. And I remember it very distinctly because they talked about Sass and Haml, which at the time was only like a Ruby technology. It was still built in Ruby and only Ruby on Rails folks were really using it. And I left that meeting being like, or that meetup just being like, Sass rules. I've never heard of this thing before. It's so cool. And that was like, even like the SCSS syntax like wasn't even the main way that people wrote Sass at that point. It was the actual Sass syntax. And I went home and I made YouTube videos about it, and that kind of like blew up my YouTube channel. So it's crazy how influential
the energy
one singular meetup can be. Yeah. Because that really changed my career in a lot of ways. And in that same like vein, like what was the best meetup you guys have ever been to?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, honestly, I would just say like the early days of DenverScript. So I moved to Denver back in 2015, and back then the meetup scene here was so vibrant. Like DenverScript would regularly have 100 people or more attending. There were like 5 or 6 other tech meetups always happening. That's honestly what's inspired me to try and keep DenverScript going, is like I want to get the meetup community here in Denver back to that point. And so I just remember showing up and like there's tons of people, we're eating pizza, everyone's talking about tech. There were like really good topics. Like I can't even remember what it was, but just the atmosphere alone is like, I remembered it, and I'm always trying to replicate that or make it keep happening.
I think the best ones I've been to, I don't specifically remember which one it was, but the thing I take away from them is simply the social aspect, being able to meet people, which is why I am gung-ho for meetup without a talk, because the talks are a lot of more work. You have to have a projector and a PA and something. Like sometimes developers just want to get together and talk shop. Sometimes those are really fun as well, being able to just get together and meet like-minded people and have some really good conversations. So that's like, if I look back at it, like I don't remember any of the talks really, but I do remember the people and the conversations we've had about tech.
Yeah, you know what, Wes, for a lot of my life, I've been way less social than you. So like, I can think of like many talks that I've been to or meetups that were like mostly influential for the tech. The best one, I remember going to a Southeast Michigan JavaScript meetup where somebody was showing Meteor to the first time, and it was pre-Meteor 1.0, so it was very early in Meteor.
Yeah.
And the thing I remember most about it, besides being like, I mean, at that point I was mostly working in Drupal, and if I built a node site, it was just like super basic Express server. But I remember watching this talk, and the most fun thing about it is the moment that this guy shows a real-time demo, every other person in the audience was trying to hack it. And since it was on the screen, things were just popping up on the screen and it's real time. And he was cracking up because he was like, "You think I didn't think of this? Keep trying." It was just like very, very funny. And I remember it felt like, what a cool community this is.
Yeah.
Something comes up like this. It's a cool tech. I'm, inspired by it, but at the same time, everybody is trying to break it. And that like says so much about the community.
The audience participation ones, I went to another one where it was like they had some real time stuff, and then they told everybody to go on their phones. Or at the time, nobody had phones. It was open up your laptop and do the real time. I think we had phones back then, but those are the best demos where you're like, holy smokes, you get really excited about it, and everybody gets to chime in. I did the webcam putting glasses over people's faces like 15 years ago. And then I would turn the MacBook around and put it on the audience. And then all the audience would have glasses overlaid on them, which is like, that's nothing these days. But at the time, it was so exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if you go back, we were just doing static web pages or, content sites or blogs and stuff. So once more dynamic stuff was possible, it was all just kind of shocking to see it in action.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially because YouTube wasn't necessarily a place where you were going to see this kind of tech. It was conferences or meetups.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about like what it takes to run a meetup or like how to get speakers and stuff like that. But I feel like most of the people listening to this episode are probably just going to be an attendee rather than a meetup organizer. I would say go out there, organize meetups. Like we literally need organizers out there. Like meetups aren't going to happen unless people put them on.
Or even just help.
Yeah, or help. Yeah, be a co-organizer, maybe like help put the chairs out. Yeah, like definitely get involved, I guess is what I'm saying. But and ultimately, as an attendee, what should you do or how should you behave? I would say just be curious. So ask questions. For myself, I have like social anxiety and I'm like, always like very quiet. And so it's like harder for me to even get the courage to go to these meetups because they're usually like very social events. But I've even had success just like hanging around, listening to other people talk, or just being curious in general. And then also, like, I know a lot of like newer devs or beginners are told that they should go to meetups for like networking. But my advice there is just go and be curious and be yourself. Don't go there specifically looking for a job because nobody really wants to talk to somebody when their only thing that they want is to find a job. Really, you go to meetups to meet people and basically just have your face out there so people have seen you and know who you are. So if they're ever hiring or they know somebody who's hiring, they can be like, "Oh yeah, I talked to whoever at this meetup. You should check them out."
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot on this show where like, the number one hack to getting hired is networking. It sounds like that's like such an absurd statement considering, how common sense it's always been or something that's like a classical thing. But just being a part of the community and chatting with people it's a hack. It's a hack to, finding employment. People are looking and you want them to think of you.
I think like one of the best things you can do as an attendee also is like learn how to ask good questions and learn how to pull information out of people. I always try to do this whenever I go to a meetup or conference because there's often really cool people who are not excited to talk about what they're working on. Like Scott and I, whatever, we're pretty good at that. But there's a lot of people who may be a little bit anxious and they're working on something really nifty or they've hit specific problems. And I always try to find those people. Ooh, what do you work on? What stack is that? How do you find that? What are your thoughts on that? And after a couple questions, they start sort of coming out of their shell, and there's some really interesting stuff. Plus, like, who doesn't love being asked questions about what you're working on? Who doesn't love that feeling? I have several friends who, whenever you meet up with them, they ask such good questions about what's going on in your life, and you leave feeling like, they're so good at asking questions, you know? I always try to, like, how do I be that person for other people?
Yeah, we have a buddy who's so good at that. Any social gathering, it's almost like a interview in a non-negative way, but he comes with all these brilliant questions. And he was in like Toastmasters, and he had some like actual training and speaking and stuff like that. So I think he picked it up not by just being good at it. I think he picked it up by practicing. But it really facilitates a great conversation. And even just somebody like asking follow-up questions to something, like somebody tells you something, you know, asking a why or what made you do that, or what, you know, how did you get into that? Or those types of questions can really make somebody feel like you care about what they're talking about, but also like it can facilitate really interesting discussion. I'm curious your thoughts, CJ, because you've been seeing attendance numbers and you've been seeing how many people show up to things. Do you think meetups are truly back, or do you think they're still recovering, or are they, you know, is it a totally different world for meetups these days?
Yeah. I mean, I can only talk from the Denver perspective and like what I see here, but it seems like they're still recovering because, so like I've attended the React meetup a few times here. It's run in Denver by a guy named Jeff. And it used to be the biggest meetup in Denver.
Oh, yeah.
And lately, like the numbers have dwindled. It's like maybe 10 or 15 people that show up. But I think it's hard. For one, it used to be that everyone was in the office. And so they were already in town. And then the meetup was happening that night. So they could just walk right over from their office to the meetup. And now a lot of people work remotely. And so to get to these meetups, you basically have to like revert, like you're commuting at the end of the day to get into town to attend the meetups. So from what I've seen, it's like it's picking up, and I think it just takes people like me and my co-organizers that actually want to put this stuff on, because like if I didn't have the ambition to like run this thing, it wouldn't happen. Like there was an organizing group before, like they kind of burnt out on it, and like it got really hard, and then I picked it up. But I'm at this point, it's like me and the other organizers that are the only thing left to make sure that DenverScript actually happens. We're on our way up. And I would hope that in other cities and other communities as well, there are people that basically step up to the plate and start organizing, because that's what it's going to take. Because it does feel like there are, like, people want meetups, people want to be social or come to like these technical events, but they just need somebody else to put them on. So people are always like, who's going to host that meetup, or who's going to organize that meetup? Nobody ever wants to organize the meetup.
Yeah, so. I know. I'm so much better at being like, I will speak at this meetup than I am, let me organize something, mostly because I'm not a planner. I'm terrible at planning. But, you know, I'm happy to speak in support. I will say that, like, I totally get what you're saying about the not working in the city or whatever, because a lot of these meetups happen in cities, or they happen in larger hubs, you know, where people are at. But for me to head to North Denver at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday is tough. And it's like going to the gym. After you go to the gym, or while you're at the gym, you're like, this rules. I got to do this. But then before you go to the gym, sometimes you're like, I don't really feel like it today. This seems like a lot of effort. So when you do go to a meeting or a meetup, you oftentimes really do feel energized in a way that you don't get from just sitting at home and whatever. So I definitely encourage you, if you're out there and, you know, the next meetup comes around, you're wondering if you should go, just get yourself out there and make it happen.
Every single time I go to a conference or a meetup, I tell my wife, I don't feel like going to this. You know, that was so annoying.
It's for me for anything.
Go to this.
Yeah.
And then I come back. How was it? Oh, it was awesome. Met some really cool people. Oh, this guy works on this really interesting project, and always well worth it. But yeah, it's just like the gym.
Yeah. Exercise that muscle. Cool. Is there anything we didn't cover, CJ, about meetups that, you know, you felt like is important for people to know?
No, I would just say from the organizing perspective, the DenverScript team actually created a organizer onboarding and organizer handbook before the roles and the things that we all had to do together was very like ephemeral. It was kind of just like, oh, did you do that? Or I'm going to be doing that this time. And over time, we realized we need a little bit of some guidelines, right? So we actually have for every month, we have a Excel sheet that has what are the roles and who's going to be doing them. And then we also put together as a team the handbook that says like, well, if this happens, what should you do? Or if you're taking on this role, these are your responsibilities. Especially if you have a larger organizing team, something like that is great because it makes it easier so that if I can't attend for whatever reason, everyone else knows what jobs I was doing, which is actually the case next week. I'll be at LoraCon, so I won't be doing the DenverScript meetup, but everyone already knows what should be happening or what roles I had. So they could very easily basically do my job if I'm not there. So I think that's important to have.
Yeah, I think that's important. And if you're out there, you're thinking about, should I go, should I not go? 1, go to the meetup. 2, if you have a good time and you want to get involved, do get involved. If you don't have the time, whatever, I understand, but don't hesitate to get involved. People always want the help, even if it's something simple. And then 3, if you want to test the waters in speaking, there's nothing better than getting an opportunity to speak at a local meetup and share something interesting and grow those skills. You'll be better for it after you do it. So one last thing, I think, before we get into CJ's sick picks and shameless plugs, how do you even find a meetup? I remember when I was in Ann Arbor, there were meetups in Ann Arbor, but they were like the Southeast Michigan JavaScript meetup. And like, this is the only JavaScript meetup for all of Southeast Michigan. So how do you even find these things?
Like I mentioned earlier, meetup.com has a ton of meetups on there and it's in most cities. So I would start there, search for a particular technical topic or just type in JavaScript, see what shows up. You can also sort by distance. From there, you can search on Guild. And then if you can't find things in either place, just use a search engine and just say JavaScript meetup, my city name, to see what shows up. The other aspect of that is maybe if you can't find a meetup, maybe you find like an online community of people that are in your area. Because then you can maybe do some like maybe more casual meetups. Because like I mentioned, we have a Slack that is people in the Denver area. There's like several thousand people in there. There's a Discord as well. And so if you can at least find that, now you've kind of like found an online community of people in your same city. And then maybe you can organize like, hey, let's go to a brewery or just like a small get together or something like that.
Yeah, I even just Googled just now while we were talking, and I found a Reddit post where somebody linked to like 3 or 4 different things. And then that sent me to the Slack channel that you've been talking about in this episode. And inside of that Slack channel, there's a post that's like, here are the, 20 active groups or whatever that are going on as of right now. So it's like one thing, can lead you to something else the next thing you know, because it's not like these things are happening super in private. People are posting about them somewhere. So as long as you're searching for them, you should be able to find something, and hopefully you can find something nearish you that you can make it to without too much issue. So yeah, cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing your insights, CJ. I always do enjoy DenverScript, and I admire you for having the courage to put together something like that and throw it even with a group of other people, because it's not something that I could do personally. And I do love attending. So yeah, so shout out to you, CJ, for doing that. And along with that, do you have a sick pick or shameless plug for us today?
I came prepared with a sick pick. I've got
right.
Philo's walking tamales. I've been eating a vegan diet for, I guess, close to a year now. And it's always hard to find savory food that you can take on the go. And this is one of those. This is literally a tamale in a bag. And it's vegan. It's honestly, even if you're not vegan, these are really tasty. So definitely check these out, because these are great. Like if you're going on a hike, throw it in your bag. Or like my wife and I went to Red Rocks last night to see a movie, and they don't have vegan options there. So we had some of these in our bag, which is great.
Nice. Yeah, those are 2 of the most Denver things you could have said. We're going on a hike. We're going to Red Rocks. So you could have said, I'm going to do yoga at Red Rocks. That would have been a launching the next thing.
So what, do you heat it up, or you just kind of go
on
crunchies?
Yeah, I would say like it's tastier if you heat it for 15 seconds in the microwave, but you don't have to. Like it tastes fine even at room temperature.
Oh yeah. You put on the dash of your car while you're out.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Just like heat it up.
Yeah.
Sick.
What about my brother-in-law's a farmer, and that's what he does with his lunch. He has a name for it, which is not something I'll say on air, but it's funny.
What about shameless plugs? Do you want to plug anything?
Yeah, I'll plug, first of all, the DenverScript meetup. If you're in the Denver area, come check us out. Also, if you are traveling through Denver and maybe you want to speak, come let me know. That'd be great too. And then also check out the Syntax YouTube channel. I've been publishing videos there. I just put out a video on Hono, so definitely check that out. Yeah.
Oh, sick. CJ, when you said that, I was like, you did publish it? And I look on YouTube, you just published this 1 hour ago. So this is hot off the presses. I did not even know you did this.
Stop using Express Hono, which I've been calling Hono for way too long.
I actually didn't even verify the pronunciation.
Hono, no, Hono's
I think
right.
I said,
it's whatever I say is wrong.
Yeah,
you're certainly, I've had like 3 people correct me in the last week, and I realized, man, I say everything wrong.
Yeah, I do that too. If I don't hear somebody say it, I just make up I'm awful at words, so I just make up how to say it. Well, cool, CJ, it's been real, and we'll have you on again sometime soon. But thank you for sharing your knowledge with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great. Like I said, I'm passionate about it, so always happy to talk about it. And if you have any questions or thoughts, or you want to run a meetup, just hit me up on Twitter.
Cool. And if you are hosting a meetup and you want more people to see it, leave a comment on the video below and just say, hey, I'm hosting this meetup. It's in this area, and just get some eyes on it. We'll be happy to share that for you.
All right. Peace.
Peace.
Later.